Hi, this is Tamara at mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to make the Bunches of Bobbles blanket, which is a free pattern on mooglyblog.com. To get the written pattern, as well as information on all the other things you'll see in this video, please do go to the link in the description where you'll find a link out to the written pattern, and then hook and the yarn and everything else you need. For this pattern, we'll be using Red Heart Bunches of Hugs yarn in 3 different colorways, and I'll be using a J hook, which is a 6mm. This one is by Furls, one of their Streamline collection. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the blanket we'll be making right here. Let me pull one of these skeins of yarn off so you can get a better look at our pattern. It's mostly double crochets and single crochets with these fun front post bobbles worked every so often that dip down into the row before. It's also got a lovely border, which is really textured. Hopefully you can kind of see that in profile a little bit here, and I'll be demonstrating how to make that as well. The Bunches of Bobbles stitch pattern calls for any multiple of 6 when you first chain. Now this is written out as a multiple of 6 plus 5 plus 1 more for the turning chain, but if you're just starting with a plain old chain, then you can just go ahead and chain any multiple of 6. If you choose instead to start this pattern with foundation stitches, foundation single crochet would be a good substitute, then you just need a multiple of 6 plus 5 more stitches tacked on then at the end. I will be starting with a standard chain, and I'm just going to make a small swatch here. This is just 18 stitches, which will be enough to demonstrate the stitch pattern itself. After we've chained our starting chain, and again, if you want to make this full size, there's instructions in the written pattern, then we're going to skip the chain closest to the hook and go into the next chain. I like to work into the back hump of the chain. If you look at chain anatomy, usually this is considered the top of the chain where you've got the two loops, sort of make a V there. I like to go into the back. It just gives a really nice finished edge, I think, which is great to work into when you're adding your border. But that's just personal preference. Like I said, it is totally up to you. So back to this first row. This first row is, like I said, just as simple as could be. It's mostly a matter of counting out your chains and then single crocheting right across into each chain. It can be a little bit fiddly, which is why I suggest if you like using foundation stitches, you could use foundation single crochet instead. Might be a little quicker depending on which one you prefer making. I'm also starting with my first color, color A. In this pattern, I've chosen to use the Rain colorway of Bunches of Hugs, but of course you can use whichever colors you prefer. So since we're just single crocheting on across, I will see you when I get to the end of row 1. Okay, and here we are done with row 1. You can see it's just single crochets across. And once again, I know I'm harping on this a little bit with the stitch counts, but when you're starting a blanket, you don't want to get that wrong. So I started with 18 chains, so now I've got 17 stitches because I skipped that first chain as a turning chain. So after you've made that first row, it should be a multiple of 6 plus 5 more. We've got 17, that's a multiple of 6, 12 plus 5 is 17. All right, now we can continue. So for row 2, very easy. It's just double crochet on across. And I wrote this out with a chain 3 as the first stitch, but if you prefer, you can use whatever chain 3 alternative you like to use for your double crochets, whether that's a chainless standing double crochet or a chain 2 that doesn't count as a stitch. Once you put that border on, it won't really matter. So it's whichever method is up to you. If you're interested in trying the chainless starting double crochet, I do have a link to that in the tutorial that is linked in the description for this video. So it's got its very own video tutorial. So like I said, row 2, easy as can be. We're just going to double crochet right on across. Whatever your stitch count was for that first row will be your stitch count for the second row. And at the end of row 2, we're going to switch to our second color. And at that point, what we're going to do is finish the last stitch of this row with that next color. We're not going to cut the yarn. Now, if you prefer, if you're using a lot of colors, if you're maybe using this pattern as a stash buster, or just like I say, you're using a whole bunch of colors, then you may end up wanting to cut the yarn after every color section. Oops. Got concentrating on my talking more than my crocheting there. So like I was saying, if you're using a whole bunch of colors, you may end up needing to cut the yarn after each section is done. However, with just 3 colors, I find that they float up the side really well. You can just carry them right along the side and then cover them up with the border. Honestly, when I look at the finished blanket, I would have to look really close to even tell which side has the floats of color. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that for you now. What we want to do is change colors on the last stitch of the row. So however many stitches you need to make for row 2, when you get to the end, that's when it's time to change colors for the next color, in this case color B. So I'm going to start the stitch just as I normally would for a double crochet and stop when I have 2 loops left on the hook. Then I'm going to bring in my second color. And here is my color 2, or color B. This one I'm using the Capri colorway. So I want to leave a good 6 to 8 inches here at the end for my tail again, so I can weave that in when I'm all done. But I'm just going to go ahead and yarn over with this new color and pull through to finish the stitch. And then very carefully, again, make sure you don't pull that tail on through. I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 for the turning chain for row 3. And I can tug back down on those a little bit if need be too. And then I turn and I'm ready to work back the other direction. So to begin row 3, we're going to start by single crocheting in the first 5 stitches. That chain 1 does not count as a stitch itself. So we do want to work into that first stitch. There's 3, 4, and 5. All very easy so far, all pretty standard stitches, but now we're going to go ahead and work that front post bobble, which is what gives this blanket its unique texture. To do so, we're going to start by yarning over, then we're going to go around the post of the next stitch. So instead of working under the top 2 loops like we normally would, we're going to go around the post from front to back. So that means we come from the front of our fabric, go around the post, around the back, and come to the front from behind. So let me show you that move again one more time. I yarn over, then I go around the post like so. Then I'm going to yarn over, pull up my loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and stop with 2 loops left on the hook. And then I'm going to do that 3 more times around this same post. So to do that, I yarn over again, and I'm going to go under, just right under, still around the post, but right under the loops I made before, the stitch I made before, like so. And then I stop with 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over, go around that same post again, pull up a loop, pull through 2, 4 loops on the hook. One more time, we'll yarn over, go right around that post. You can see we're kind of using the whole length of the post here, and that's fine. Pull up our loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and then when we've got 5 loops on the hook here, it's time to yarn over one more time and pull through all 5 of those loops like so. And that is our front post bobble. At this point, you want to come back to your fabric here and find the next stitch and just work a single crochet right in there. And you want to make sure that this single crochet is nice and tight up against the fabric. You don't want to accidentally pull this loop up really high or pull it over, then your bobbles won't have as much texture. So really pull that single crochet down, not so tight you can't work into it on the next row, but do go ahead and pull it down and you'll get a great 3D bobble there that dips down into that previous row's color. From there, it's a very simple repeat. We've got 5 single crochets in between each of our bobbles. So that's 3, 4, 5, and then it's time to bobble again. So let's do it again. We're going to yarn over, find the post of the next stitch, and if you ever have any questions, you can just count the stitches in between your bobbles too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I know this is the next one. Great way to double check. I'm going to go around that post again from front to back, and then I always stop that last loop from that stitch left on my hook, and keep doing that until I've got 5 loops on my hook. So that's 4. So one more time. You can see I've just gone right on down that post with those stitches. I don't have to put them right on top of each other or all at the top. I can just go use that whole length of the post there before I finish off my bobble, and then find that next stitch and come right in there. So that is our repeat for row 3. And when you get to the end, you should have 5 stitches left to work single crochets into. And of course, if you used the chain 3 start, then that will be the last one you work into for your last stitch there. Easy as can be. That's row 3. For row 4, it's going to be exactly the same as row 2. we're just going to chain 3 to start, or again, whatever start you prefer, and then double crochet in each stitch across. So back to that same stitch count as for row 2 as well. In fact, each row should have the same stitch count total. Some rows, of course, will be made up of a combination of bobbles and, well, front post bobbles specifically, and single crochets, but ultimately you will have the same stitch count in every single row. If your stitch count messes up somewhere, places to check, definitely either end, that make sure you're working into your turning chains. If you're using a chain 3 start, make sure you're working into whatever your chain 3 or double crochet substitute is there. Make sure you're not missing the last stitch, and also make sure you're not missing any of the stitches right on around the bobbles. You can see here when I'm working back from the other direction, I can see there's the bottom of those bobble stitches peeking out from behind, but it's also really easy to miss the stitch right before or right after the bobble. And then of course you want to make sure you work into the top of the bobble itself. Oops, that's a single crochet. One a double crochet, but you want to make sure you work into each one of those as well. I have certainly in the past suffered from missing those before. So now I know when I'm working back across a row with bobbles in it to keep an eye out for the ones that like to hide. So when we reach the end of row 4, here I am at that last stitch already. I should have 17 stitches across, nice and even. See the color peeking out from behind there. That's when I know it's time to switch to color 3. So I want to get ready to do that by bringing up our third color. Okay, and here I've got my third color. This is actually the print. It has the gray and blue and white striping in it. I just happen to be in a white section right there. So normally I would do what I did before and just pull that through. But since I'm carrying these yarns along the sides, I want to take a moment before I add that next color and pull up this gray so that it continues along the side so we don't get great big loops or floats along the side. So I'm going to pull this last stitch out for a minute and show you how I pull these yarns up along with me. So I'm going to yarn over, go into that last stitch again, and this point I'm going to stop right here. So I've pulled up that loop through the stitch, but I haven't yarned over and pulled through any of my loops here yet. Now I'm going to ignore this little blue end. This gets woven in at the end. Don't have to worry about that. But this gray one, there we go, I do want to be able to use this later when I come back to this color in my striping pattern. So what I'm going to do at this point, let me try and pull this little end out of the way so it's a little easier to see. I'm just going to lay this gray end over my blue end before I yarn over with the blue and pull through these 2 loops right here, like so. Just like that, I've pulled that gray up a little bit and tucked it up nicely along the side. I don't want to pull it too tight because that will, you know, cause the side of our blanket to pucker up, and I don't want it to be so loose that it's hanging out, you know, here on the side, causing problems when I go to work my border. So I just want to pull it so that it's nice, just not super snug, just the right amount of tension. If I pull on my blanket, it doesn't cause it to pucker or make it stiff at all, but it's also not hanging out too loose on the side. So that's how I tack down the previous rose color. Now I'm ready to pull in the color we're going to use here. So I will go ahead, just as before, leave a nice little length and finish off the stitch with the next color, and I can pull down on those loops to tighten it up a little bit. And then I'm ready to chain 1 again and start working back across with another single crochet row. Now this is going to be really, really similar to row number 3 where we made our bobbles before, but one small difference. Instead of starting with 5 single crochets, we're just going to start with 2. So there's 1 and 2. Again, don't worry too much about this looking too much like a mess right now. A lot of that's going to get covered with our border. Just let all those ends hang out and wait for you. So after we've made our first 2 in row, what is this? Row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, row 5, starting to lose track there. After we've made our first 2 single crochets, then it's time for another front post bobble. So we go around that one right there, just as before, front to back. Oh, good grief. Keep dropping my yarn. Let's try this again. There we go. We're going to make our front post bobble, and we'll do the same thing again until we get to the point where we have 5 loops left on the hook, just as before. And you can see I've also flipped my fabric, my previous rows here, to make it that much easier to work around that post. You can try that if you like, or you can hold it upright, whatever you prefer. So I'll finish that bobble, find my next stitch, like so. Remember, we don't work into the top of that stitch, we're working our post stitches around. That gets left blank. That is well used already. So then we work 5 single crochets again. So very, very similar to row 3. The whole point is for row 5, the thing that makes it different, I guess, is that we only start with 2 at the beginning, and then, well, of course, we'll have 2 at the end, and this gives us the offset pattern so that our bobbles aren't all lined up. If you prefer the lined up look, if you actually wanted all your bobbles to be in a straight line, you could do the same thing again, just repeat row 3 and work 5 and then the bobble. But instead, we offset it by only working 2 at the beginning and then again at the end. So we'll have one more bobble in this round, or excuse me, in this row than we did on our previous bobble row. So that's a way to help keep count too. Since this one is a little bit offset, we just had 2 bobbles in our last bobble row, and this bobble row will get 3. So get those made together here. So after you've made your bobble, then of course it's back to the repeats of 5 single crochets followed by a bobble until we get to the end of this row. And since it's a row 5, we should have 2 stitches left after the last bobble of this row. Looks like we're in good shape. There's 3 stitches left, including that chain 3 turning chain. So we'll work one more front post bobble for this row. And once again, you can see I've kind of flipped my fabric. That way I can use my non-hook hand to hold that stitch that I'm working around up a little easier, separate from the other stitches, and it just makes it that much quicker to make these little bobbles. So we yarn over, pull through, finish that one. 2 stitches left to finish off row 5 here. Make sure you go into that top of your turning chain if that's what you're counting as your first double crochet. And then from there, same thing as row 4. We just double crochet all the way back across, and then we'll be ready to change colors again. So I want to demonstrate that one more time when we've got all our colors here. So I will see you at the end of row 6. Okay, you can see we've actually had a color change in our last yarn here, one of our prints. This is the magical print in Bunches of Hugs. So before I start this last stitch of this row, I just want to show one more time how I bring up those other colors. So I've got my yarn over, I'm ready to go into the last stitch of the previous row here. And I know this is where I'm going to be changing colors. So just as before, I'm going to pull up one loop. And then when I've got all the loops on the hook, but I haven't pulled through any of them yet, I'm going to let that rest for a minute. And I'm going to let that rest because that's the end from this color that I'm currently using. So I'll ignore that. And I know the gray color is what I want to work with next. So to bring the blue up just a little bit, I'll find that active end here, not the tail end, but the end I want to crochet with next, and lay that over the end I'm crocheting with, just like I did before. Yarn over with the current color, pull through the first 2 loops, and my blue is up here and waiting for next time. Then I want to come all the way back down to this gray. You can see that's the gray we pulled up and trapped inside our blue. That's the next color I'm going to be using, so I'll yarn over and finish the last stitch with that one, like so. Then I'm ready for my row 3 repeat. I just chain 1, turn back this way to come back the other direction, and I would start with 5 single crochets again. 2, 3, 4, 5. Pull all these little guys out of the way a little bit here, and then it would be time to bobble again right over the top, and you can see that would make our bobbles just line up. And that's our repeat. Row 3, where we start with 5 single crochets and then our front post bobble. Row 4, which is just double crochet. Row 5, which is a bobble row again, but we just start with 2 and end with 2 so that we get it offset, and then another row of double crochet. And that is really the 4-row repeat. Very easy to memorize. So I'm not going to stop showing you those stitches because I think you've got it now, and you can rewind if you don't. And I'm going to move on to finishing up this blanket and then working the edging. So in the instructions, I have you keep working rows 3 through 6 over and over again, changing colors, of course, every 2 rows in that same pattern, colors A, B, and C, A, B, C, A, B, C, on up. Of course, you can feel free to change that at whatever point you like. And then I have you repeat row 3 again. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll talk about how to finish up the blanket and add that edging together. Okay, so if you're following the written instructions, then this represents row 79, when you've made all the length of your blanket and you've made that final row 3 repeat. After that, it's time for row 80, or whatever row you've chosen to end it on. When you've finished the textured portion of your blanket and you want to get set up for your edge row, or your edging rounds, I should say, then what we're going to do is simply work back the other direction, not with a row of double crochet as we have before, but with just a simple row of single crochet. So for row 80, or whatever your final row is before your edging and your border rows, you just want to work a row of single crochet on across. So I will see you at the end of this row. All right, and I have just worked a simple row of single crochet across from the wrong side here. You can see this is the right side where our bobbles are. So it's time to begin our border round 1. What we want to do first is just work a really even round of edging. So I'm going to chain 1 again and just work single crochet back across that top again. I know that seems like a lot of single crochet, but it'll balance that first couple rows really nicely. So when we work single crochet across here, we're just going to get to the corner, work a chain 1, and then work single crochet all along this edge, chain 1 again, single crochet across the foundation chain 1 again, and single crochet across this edge. You've seen me single crochet quite a bit now, so I am going to go ahead and work on these 3 sides, and then I'll meet you over here and we can work the single crochet along this edging together, so I can show you how to work around these ends, because you'll notice these are all still attached. All right, and here we are at the end of border round 1. I've single crocheted all the way across that last row, down the side, and across the foundation chain, and I'm ready to work up this final side. So I'm just going to chain 1 to give me a little space to get around the corner here, and then I'm going to continue to single crochet right along this edge. And you want to try and just go into the sides of the stitches. I find a good rule of thumb is 2 single crochets, or stitches rather, in the side of each double crochet row, and 1 single crochet worked in the side of each single crochet row. But for this border, one of the great things about it is stitch count doesn't matter, so you can just keep working stitches until you get a border or an edge that lays really nice and flat. So you can adjust that however it works best for your gauge. Now, this is the side with all our ends sticking out, except for our very first one back here. And these little beginning ones, the ones that aren't still attached, the ones that to yarn, the ones that aren't still in use, so these little guys here, you can definitely weave these in at this point and just go ahead and get those 3 ends, which is all there is at the beginning at this point, just 3 ends. You can go ahead and weave those in and get them completely out of the way. There we go. That last one did not want to come up. So those we can essentially ignore from now. Since I'm just making a little swatch, I'm not going to actually use this for anything. I'm just going to go ahead and cut those off really short so they stay out of our way right now. But you wouldn't want to do that. Don't cut them until you've woven your ends in. The ones we need to think about are these other 2 here that are still attached to our yarn. If possible, you want to try and leave these attached so you can just pull them up and use them for the edging too. But at this point, since you're going to be working around the entire blanket, they can get in the way. So it's okay to cut these and add them again for the border later if you want to. Just make sure you leave enough edge, or end rather, enough length so that you can weave those in really nicely afterwards. I'm going to attempt to leave them attached. That's what I did with my full-size blanket, so that I can just pull those up and use them and only have 6 ends to weave in for the entire blanket. So when I get to the ends that I'm going to be weaving in, these little ones that I've cut off short, I can just crochet right over those for a little bit, although I do recommend coming back and weaving them in afterwards, at least the very ends of them, just to get them down nice and secure. Now you're going to have lots of little stuff to work over here, and that's okay. You just want to try and get those stitches to look as even as possible. When you come to the ends that are still attached to the yarn that you're going to want to use later, you don't want to crochet over those too much because you don't want to carry them to a new place in the blanket. So just push those right to the back. Let's see if I can show it here. Get those little guys out of the way. So that would be a stitch right before those ends are sticking out, and I'll just let those slide right in between those stitches and continue my way along the side here. So if I were to flip over my project here, which I'll do in just a second, there we go. You can see those little guys are just hanging out there right in back, ready and waiting to be picked up when I need them. But from the front of the blanket, you can't really tell that that's where the ends are. If I'd taken my time and gone a little bit more carefully and evenly into these, it would look a little bit better. If you find that you don't like the way you're working to especially the different color ones where it shows up a little better, go ahead and pull those out and rework them until you're happy with them. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I do that quite a bit when I'm making the finished items. So when you've worked all the way around, then it's time to chain one again for the corner, and then you can just slip stitch right into that first single crochet you made to finish off border round 1. Border round 2, we're going to stick with our color A, or whatever color you landed on when you decided to start bordering your blanket, and I'm going to work a double crochet in each stitch around. So once again, you can start with a chain 3, chainless starting double crochet, chain 2 that doesn't count as a stitch, whatever your preferred method is. Then we're just going to double crochet, just a standard double crochet in each of the stitches around. This is a good chance to stop, and if you have left all your yarns attached, untangle them. I'll need to do that here in a minute myself. But when we get to the corners on this one, I just want to point out for border round 2, you'll work in each of these chain 1 spaces. So the chain 1 space at the corner, you want to go in there with 2 double crochets, chain 1, 2 double crochets. So that's how you make the corners for border round 2. So when I get to the last one of those, we'll do it together. All right, and we're almost finished with border round 2. You can see I've just worked double crochets in each stitch around. And if you look closely at the corner here, you can see it's 2 double crochets, chain 1, and 2 double crochets into the corner chain 1 space. Now I've stopped right here because we've come to the side again where our ends are hanging out waiting for their turn at the border. So I just want to work those up a little bit, just like as we carried them around the side before. I just want to work those up a little bit so that they don't create big loops hanging out on the back side of our blanket. So when I get to that section where I know they're coming up here, I'm going to do them one at a time. So I'm going to go into this stitch just like when we did carrying them up the side before. I'm going to pull one of these, whichever one of these just seems to be closer. Right now it feels like that's the blue one. It wants to go first. So I'm going to pull that blue end right up in front of our working yarn, just like we did when we were working along the side there, so that when I yarn over with my working yarn, it's just trapped right up inside there. And since I'm not going to yarn over with this one, I just want to keep it going. I'll put it in front one more time, just twisting those together, and finish the stitch again with my working yarn. And I can give this one a tug, this unused color, to kind of pull it to the back there so it is a little more hidden. Then I'm going to do the same thing in the next stitch with the other yarn. So I'll go into the next stitch, pull through that first loop, and then I'll find that last color, color C, still hanging out back here. Right now it's on a gray section, so it's a little harder to tell, but I can see that if I pull all these out of the way here, hopefully you can see too, that this is the one that is still attached down here. And I want to put that in front of my working yarn, yarn over with the working yarn, like so, and then put color C in front of the working yarn one more time, twist those together, and make sure I end up with that color A to finish that stitch. And of course that one hides really, really well, gray on gray, but you can see it looks a little bit of a hot mess right now, but I'll show you how this turns out on the finished blanket too, and you'll be able to see even better. From there, I just continue on crocheting across. Now that I've done a couple more stitches, it's a little easier to see. It really is hidden. You don't see that color peeping out through the back. Just kind of give it that tug to keep it along the back of the stitch. So, all right, we'll work our way over here to our corner. This is the last corner for border round 2. So when I come to that final chain 1 space there, that one's a little bit easier to find. I just want to work those 2 double crochets, chain 1, 2 double crochets, all into that corner chain 1 space to make our new corner. One more double crochet and that'll be finished. There we have it. And then to finish it off, of course, you slip stitch right to the top of the chain 3, or the chainless starting double crochet, or the double crochet, or however you began that round. And that's border round 2. To begin border round 3, it's going to be very similar to border round 2. You can start again with a chain 3 or whatever type of double crochet substitute you like. And then from there, we're going to work double crochets again, but we're going to work in the front loop only of each stitch. So if you're not familiar with front loop only versus back loop only, when you look at the top of a stitch, you see those 2 loops, and normally you'd go under both of them to make a crochet stitch. For front loop only, you want to go under just the one that's closest to you. So front loop and back loop are crocheter dependent. If I were to turn this around this way, then this would be the loop. Oops, let me get that a little better angle here. If I were to turn it around, this would become the front loop. But since we're going this direction, here we are. This is the front loop, the one that's closest to me. So that means I'll yarn over and go under just that front loop of the next stitch, like so, to make my next double crochet. And then I'm going to do that on every stitch around. So just come up right in the middle of the stitch like that, so you can work under the front loop only. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as the previous row. Double crochet in the front loop only of each stitch around. We just need to treat these corners a little differently. So let me work my way around, and I'll show you how I make the corners for the border round 3 in just a moment. Okay, so I've worked across a little bit here, and I'm at my corner chain 1 space. So for the corners of this row, or round rather, instead of making more double crochets, we're going to come all the way down here and just make a single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. And that's how we work the corners for this round. So they're a little bit shorter, but it'll make more sense when we come back around for the next round and the next color. After the corner, go right back to working in that front loop only. You can see I gave that a little tug. It frees up those top 2 loops for that first stitch after the corner there. And those can try and hide from you a little bit. So after that, like I said, just go back to working front loop only, double crochets with a single crochet, chain 1, single crochet in each corner, and I will see you when we're ready for the next border round. All right, and I have finished our border round 3. You can see I've got a front loop only double crochet in each stitch and single crochet, chain 1, single crochet in each corner chain 1 space. I've come all the way around, and I'm ready to finally finish color A. So to finish it off, I'm just going to go ahead and work a slip stitch in the top of our chain 3 or whatever double crochet substitute we're using, like so. And then I will break the yarn and finish it off. You can finish it off however you prefer. Some people like to pull it through for that little knot. Some people just like to pull it through, whichever you like. Now I just want to show you where we're at a little bit. By working front loop only, got all our other ends out here, we've got this great ridge of unused back loops. So that's the back loop from each of those stitches in the previous round. And we're going to be using those in this next round. So I also wanted to point out I didn't bother pulling up these other 2 colors into this round because I know what's coming up next, so I didn't need to. So that's why I didn't show you for that one. So those are still hanging out back there below our back loop onlys that are unworked. So I've finished off with color A, and I'm ready to go back to color B. In my case here, that happens to be the blue color. So I'm going to separate that out a little bit because that's what I'm going to be using to crochet with next. Color C is still attached and waiting for me there, and I can continue to ignore that one for now. What I want to do is find the double crochet stitch that is sort of directly above this color right here. So I can literally just kind of hold it straight up. Looks like that's a good choice. If I end up going off one, either way, it doesn't really matter. You just want to get as close as you can. So right there looks like a good candidate. So I'll sort of mark that with my fingers, and I'll put my hook right through the top of that stitch. This time, of course, I'm going under both loops. Then what I want to do is come underneath and find the back loop, the unworked back loop directly below. So the one that the stitch I'm in right now, the one that it was worked into the front loop of, I want to go under the back loop now with my hook. So I've gone under the top of the stitch plus the back loop of the stitch below it. Then I'm going to yarn over with my color B and pull that through both of those stitches. Then I chain 1, and I'm going to go right back in where I was under those top 2 loops of that stitch plus the unused back loop right there. and make a single crochet. And what that does is it pulls this double crochet over and creates that textured ridge like that. So it's hard to tell after that first one. We'll keep going and the ridge will start becoming just that much more apparent as we go. So we just go to the next stitch, go under the top 2 loops, go to the back, find that unused back loop like so. I'm not going to worry about the other color right now. That can continue just hanging out back there. And make a single crochet. And we're just going to work our way across just like that. Match up the top of the stitch with the unused back loop beneath it, behind it, and make a single crochet. We'll do another few here together so we can work our way to the corner. It can be real easy to miss these back loops. Just try and make sure it's the one that the stitch you're in the top of is itself worked into, and they will always match up. The ones right next to the corners do like to hide, so take your time at the corners and make sure you're getting all those. If for some reason you really just can't find it, you can always fake it. Go over to the next one. Until someone sits down and counts out the stitches, they'll never know. So here we are. We're back at our corner. We've got our single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. So I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to work a single crochet right into the top of the single crochet. Like that. That one doesn't have a back loop only. That's it worked into a corner. So we can just make a regular single crochet there. Then in the chain 1 space, we'll work another single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. And with that, we've turned the corner. Pull up a little bit more yarn here. There we go. I'll work a single crochet in the top of that single crochet. And now we're back to our double crochets. So I want to go in the top of that double crochet and the back loop behind it right there. Like I say, that one's usually the hardest one to find. So that's one you want to take your time with. And the reason I'm showing you so many of these, even though it's just simple single crochets, is I want to show you what happens here when we get to our chain 3. Now, if you've used a chainless starting double crochet, especially the improved version, which I've linked to in the tutorial on Moogly blog, then you can work that under the front loop only. But if you've done a regular chain 3 or maybe a chain 2, you might have some issues when you come to this stitch. But it's not as hard as it sounds. You're just going to go right into the top of it like you would with all the others, a little stiffer because it's got a join in it. And you can see, if we look right here, this is the stitch that chain 3 is coming out of. If I kind of pull it apart right there. So even though that back loop got used, so to speak, in the join, when we slip stitched and then chain 3, that's included, I can still squeeze my hook in there right next to our chain 3 and sort of fake that one. So that's a good tip too. If you're making your front loop double crochets and you're coming around for this round and you go, oh no, I forgot, I worked through both loops for one, go ahead and fake it. Don't pull the whole thing out. Just slide it in just like we did there for our chain 3. And no one but you will ever know. After that, we just go back to our single crochets. Make sure you go through the top. And of course that loop behind. And then gives us our really great loop, or our great look rather, and our great ridge that goes all the way around the blanket. So you can see, hopefully, there we go, finish that one up, how this is creating a really textured line that'll go all the way around the blanket, and that echoes our bobbles really nicely. From there, it's just some standard repeats. I'll pull up the finished blanket and we can talk about how to finish off this border here. Okay, so you just saw us work the first corner of border round 4 together, and you can see on the finished blanket here, that would have gotten us to right here. That's where we created that first ridge with our color A. For the border round 5, it's just double crochet again, like so. We just work another round of double crochet, just as we did before for border round 2. The next border round 6, is going to be the same way we did our last round of gray here, where you work in the front loop only, single crochet, chain 1, single crochet in each corner. That sets us up to come back in finally with our third color, color C, do another round of single crochet to shrink that last round down using the back loops only. Then we just finish that off with a round of twisted double crochet. Now I have a whole separate tutorial on how to work the twisted double crochet, and I will be linking that. Go to the link in the YouTube description, follow that link, you'll find the link there to the written pattern, the chainless starting double crochets, you can check that out, as well as the twisted double crochet, which is the final round of this blanket, which gives it this great textured edge all in one round. It looks quite a bit like the crab stitch or reverse single crochet, but it's a lot easier, so you'll have to check that out. Now I want to show you a little bit closer on the finished blanket how those colors changed in back. So let me find those for you here, but you can take a peek as I look. You get a really great smooth edge back here, even with all that texture we created in front. It actually took me a few minutes to find those, which I think speaks to how well this hiding scheme really does work. But here you can see I pulled up, I happen to have, it looks like 2 blue ends going for my color C was in a blue section when I pulled those behind on the finished blanket. So, but again, this is really subtle. In the whole finished blanket, this is the behind. You'd really have to look to notice those. But if you don't like that, if that bothers you, you can absolutely cut those ends before you start making the border. But if you don't, when you get to the end of this beautiful blanket, you'll only have 6 ends to weave in after finishing the whole thing, which personally I definitely call a win. You can see a little bit better here. Another look at our border with that textured ridge made when we worked into the back loop only and shrink down those double crochets. We do that one more time with color B. And then again, here's another look at that twisted double crochet that caps the whole thing off. So that is how you make the Bunches of Bobbles blanket. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you enjoy the pattern. Once again, please go to the link in the description for all the information on the hook, the yarn, and everything else you've seen here today. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments, and please do subscribe to the Moogly blog channel. Thanks for watching.